I'm Edward O for TFB TV, and today we're taking a look at a Chinese-made M14 pattern rifle. Now, normally if you think of a Chinese-made M14, you're probably thinking of Norinco and their M305. This is actually a Dominion Arms SOCOM 18. So we've got the 18.5-inch barrel, and then we've got a Navy sight on here up front rather than your standard flash hider sight. This is imported by Canada Ammo, and one of the things about the M14 pattern of rifles in Canada is there's lots of different importers and lots of different manufacturers. In the US, you think of Norinco as the Chinese state arms manufacturer, and they do, make tanks and heavy materials and that kind of thing too. But when it comes to small arms coming out of China, from what I can understand talking to people in the industry, you get a wide variety of plants and manufacturers working together, and exporters and importers. So Norinco and Polytech, sometimes they work together to do an export. Sometimes they're working on different guns from different plants. Sometimes you might get different plants being used for different years of rifles, which is part of why the Norinco M305s in Canada have such a year-to-year variation. But with an MSRP of $500, these are very, very popular in Canada, especially considering that all our Cold War era battle rifles have been banned. So there's no G3s, there's no FALs, none of that kind of stuff. The M14 is really the only option. These rifles aren't necessarily the most accurate out of the box, and there are some safety inspections you want to do as far as head spacing to make sure that, because this is a 7.62 by 51, that it's still capable of firing .308 commercial spec ammo, which is a higher pressure load. You also want to check that the sights are properly aligned on these, and if you can unitize your gas system or change your op rod guide, those are things that will really improve the rifle. There is a whole culture of tinkering with and building M14 pattern rifles up here, but it's not the same as building an AR-15. With an AR pattern rifle, you can usually assume that any part you buy is probably going to fit your gun. Whereas the comparison that I really like is that working with a Norinco M305 to a Springfield M1A is like working between Lego and Duplo. They're the same idea, and some of the parts might fit, but you're not guaranteed that everything is going to match. Lots of different components will require some shaping or filling or shimming to make them actually fit onto one of the Chinese rifles. There's actually a whole cottage industry in Canada of people looking to improve these rifles either through courses or gunsmithing work or offering aftermarket parts for them. So you get people like the M14 Doctor, also known as Barney or Hungry, depending on how you know him, and he offers courses across the country for $40 you show up for a day, and he'll run down a rifle and figure out what works and what doesn't and what you can do to improve it right there. You've also got people like the M14 Medic who offer a gunsmithing service specifically for these, so they'll TIG weld your gas system or that kind of thing. And then you've got companies like M14.ca, and they manufacture a whole aftermarket selection of parts for these. So you get a completely new stock system, optics mounts, all that kind of stuff. That's made here in Canada specifically because these rifles are available in such high numbers. The other reason that these rifles are popular up here is the magazine capacity. And if you watch my videos, you notice I come back to this point over and over because Canadian shooters are obsessed with magazine capacity. Under our law, the magazine for a semi-auto centerfire rifle has to be pinned to 5 rounds. But we have no magazine limitations on manual action rifles, so bolt action, pump action, lever action. What happens is you get the company Australian International Arms making a very, very nice version of the Lee Enfield that's fed from a detachable magazine, like this. This magazine will fit and drop into my M14 pattern rifle. And because the law is defined around what the magazine capacity is rather than an individual rifle at a moment of firing, it's perfectly legal to have and own and shoot. Now, this magazine doesn't necessarily function 100% in an M14 pattern rifle. I've noticed that with my last round bolt hold open, it'll actually engage prematurely with some of these AIA magazines. So you get one round that's ready to go into the chamber, but the bolt's been locked back. Some quick stats on this rifle. Without the optic, this is 9 pounds, 10 ounces. That is with that Veiltor top rail. This has a 5-pound trigger pull that is reasonably crisp. The muzzle device on here is a 5.95 by 32 pattern thread, which is actually a more common M14 thread. You'll see it from Smith Enterprises, that kind of thing. The factory M305s with the welded flash hiders, those are a much messier thread. There's some kind of a metric thread, and I can't find anybody who makes aftermarket brakes for them. One of the more common things that you get is a gunsmith who will trim down an M305 barrel, like a 22 or a 20-inch barrel, to 18.5 inches, and then thread it for something conventional. One of the fun features of this rifle is that flash hide air compensator is reversible. So if you want to make your rifle look like an SBR, you can do that, but then you're just shooting with your standard target crown. Probably the most common issue that happens with these rifles out of the box is misalignment of your iron sights. And so I opted actually to bypass that entirely and go straight to an optic. You can take a M305 and sort of build it up to that national match level of readiness, but it's probably going to cost you another $1,000 to $1,500. That still brings you in at under the price of a Springfield Armory up here, though. The exchange rate between the Canadian and US dollar really influences that. But you have to remember, when you're shooting with this, you really are working off a Cold War kind of manual of arms. The magazine release is not great. The bolt release is not great. And the safety is absolutely abysmal. I hate the safety on this gun, honestly. The M305 really is a multi-purpose rifle as far as people buying it for different kinds of concepts. You can build a good 308 deer gun out of this. You can build a heavy metal competition gun out of this. You can build your standard plinker when you buy a crate full of Chinese surplus and shoot it until it's wrecked. Considering that the MSRP on these is $500 to maybe $800, this is the kind of rifle that every Canadian gun owner should have as part of their shooting career.
That's all for this week. I want to thank Ventura Munitions and Proxybid, and always I want to thank you for taking the time to watch. I wanted to share a little bit of interesting news that just came out this week. One of the Canadian importers, North Silva, has just announced that they'll be bringing in an M305 chambered in 7.62x39. Not a Mini 30 clone, but a full-size M14 platform, but done in the Russian caliber. So stay tuned for that. I think that'll be really interesting.